fellowship of the great physician welcomes you to House Call. Our hosts today are doctors of chiropractic, Dr. Gerald Barber, Dr. Richard Jensen, who is also a board-certified acupuncturist, practicing independently in Shoreview, Minnesota. Let's join our hosts for today's program that will assist you in your most proactive health and well-being.
Welcome to House Call. I'm Dr. Gerald Lala.
And I'm Dr. Richard Jensen.
Hey, he remembered his name. Hallelujah.
Wow.
Hallelujah. We are happy to have you with us. I know that a lot of you are from different parts of the world and different parts of the United States and Canada, but Shoreview, Minnesota is God's country. It really is. If you've never been there, it's the most beautiful suburb in the state of Minnesota. It really, really is. And it is the gateway. It is the gateway, in our opinion, to the north coast of America.
It's the Scandinavian Riviera is what they call
the
it.
Scandinavian Riviera, and you know people that watch us up in St. Louis County and over in western Wisconsin, you know that's true, don't you? You just like us to come up there and spend our money on the weekends in the summertime and winter for skiing, but then leave. They don't want us to stay there, and I don't blame them.
It's
but
a beautiful area.
It's beautiful. You need to do that, and we're very, very pleased to celebrate the suburb that we live in. It's just a wonderful place if you want to raise a family, if you want clean environment, and if you want good chiropractic care. It's available there too. So today we're going to talk about, we get a lot of questions, we're going to talk about lupus, and we get a lot of emails and telephone calls and people saying, thanks for the show, we love the show, keep doing it, da-da-da-da-da-da, and we appreciate that. And then they ask us to do particular shows, and one of the shows that they often request is on lupus. And certainly you can get all the information you want on lupus from the traditional orthodox medical perspective. Just go out on the internet, and maybe about 50% of it might have some truth to it. And then there's a lot of alternative wellness care people out there saying that they've got the total solutions to lupus too, and maybe about 10% of what they're saying is true. But you'll notice they're almost all selling chiropractic care, nutrition, or some magical potion or some magical essential oil. So Dr. Jensen is going to start, and we're going to talk about a science basis of lupus, what you can do for it naturally. We're not medical doctors, so we're not going to talk about drugs and things of that nature. So Dr. Richard W. Jensen, can you begin us in the discussion of lupus?
Thank you, Dr. Gerald T. Lala. Sure, we're going to look at lupus, and a lot of times it's people are suffering needlessly with this. And in spite of what other experts may have told you, there are some answers to every problem out there. You just have to find the right person to ask. And as long as the body is alive, there is hope. Really.
I think the biggest thing in the wellness care, in alternative health care, in nutrition is probably 90% of it is not substantiated scientifically.
Right.
And the undergirding motivation is to take money from unsuspecting people. And many of these, you can't blame many of these people for treating themselves. But it is, you remember we sat down with a patient just recently here. What did he have? 84 bottles of vitamins he brought in. Bushel baskets. Honestly, this is not uncommon. And we finally did some diagnostic tests, or he finally agreed to do some diagnostic tests. Here we found a few food allergies, and that he was taking too many vitamins, therefore making him sick and having a terrible skin problem.
Right.
Now it's gone. Okay.
Nice.
Excuse me for interrupting you.
No, that's wonderful. We also look at, when we're looking at lupus, lupus actually stands for wolf. And erythematosus, or erythematus, means red. And it's denoted as a chronic recurrent disease, primarily affecting the skin, and characterized by sharply circumscribed macules and plaques displaying erythema, follicular plugging scales, and telangiectasia and atrophy. right?
Atrophy or shrinkage.
Right. So we're looking at, there are two types of lupus. There's discoid lupus, commonly referred to as DLS, and there's systemic lupus, characterized as SLE. And so when we look at, again, DLS would be, it's an autoimmune type problem. It has, there's internal antigen-antibody reactions that are characterized by lesions on the face, commonly consisting of round red patches with a dry surface, and it normally comes right across the cheeks like that. And the patches, the malar patches, have a butterfly appearance on the bridge of the nose extending to the cheeks. So, SLE, Dr. Lala.
Systemic lupus, what is it? How is it characterized? Systemic lupus is characteristically affects other areas or parts of the body, including muscles and joints, lymph glands, kidneys, lungs, heart, digestion, and eliminatory organs. So it's really serious. So systemic simply means that it's spread throughout the body. It spreads systemically throughout the body. And again, now it affects parts of the different parts of the body. Now, SLE, or systemic lupus, is considered, as Dr. Jensen mentioned briefly here, an autoimmune disorder, meaning that auto means self. There's a reaction going on where our body is attacking itself. So an autoimmune disease, the person's immune system is attacking itself, resulting in health problems. Now, what is it triggered by? Is there something that triggers it? Yes, there are. And these are in order of importance. The first thing that triggers lupus is food sensitivities, and very often they are not diagnosed. The second thing that triggers it is related to the food sensitivities, like it's a cascading issue here, is called intestinal dysbiosis. What does that mean, Dr. Jensen?
Intestinal dysbiosis means that there's a disrelationship in the bacteria or protozoal, or we call it the flora. We just cover it all by saying flora that's in the intestinal tract. And some of it works with us, and some of it works against us. And if there's a balance between in which there's control in there, it's called eubiosis. Well, dysbiosis means there's an imbalance in that we have more of the bad guys taking over our intestinal tract than the good guys. And the bad guys have a lot of deleterious effects. And it's usually that it's a fight for territory down there. You can look at it from this point of view. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and there's only so many houses on your street. And let's say the houses, that something happens. In this case, it's a antibiotic. And the antibiotic will then destroy all the bacteria, the good and the bad, which allows the yeast and fungus to continue. What they'll do is they'll go into these houses that remain free as sitters in that house, and they'll take up residence in that house. But if you keep the intestinal tract inoculated with the good bacteria, they will keep the bad ones from being squatters in that house, right? And therefore keep the balance in the intestinal tract. Mm-hmm. And they have their own ways of fighting against the bad stuff too. So
some of the other things that trigger systemic lupus are nutraceutical imbalances. What does that mean? Nutraceutical imbalances would mean that what I am eating are imbalanced. So for example, I could be taking vitamins and minerals and homeopathic remedies and essential oils and things, all those things that they are, the cure for everything, today, which of course I'm being facetious now, and I may be taking them in an imbalanced formulas that throw off this intestinal harmony. And so if I am, or nutraceutical poisoning or toxicity. So if I am eating things or ingesting things, or they're coming through my skin, for example, that are toxic, then it's going to not only affect my whole body, but it affects my gastrointestinal system. So then those squatters come into those empty rooms or those empty homes within our small intestine, and they start setting up bad camps, negative camps, toxic camps. They set up gangs down there, and they start throwing off the intestinal biosis, the intestinal harmony. Those bugs, then the bad bacteria. See, we have good bacteria in our gastrointestinal system. We have bad bacteria. But the way God created us is the good bacteria are there to defend themselves, and they're dominant. They're supposed to be predominant against the bad ones, okay? Well, if I'm not having the right diet, if I am eating foods unbeknownst to me or known to me that are toxic to my body or that I am hypersensitive to, I'm going to have this dysbiosis, this intestinal disharmony, and it's going to spread out, and very often it comes out manifested on the skin with the red wolf or in other areas of the body, as well as affecting organs that begin to malfunction over a period of time.
When you're talking about nutraceutical imbalances, let's look at some of those are, let's say, minerals. And if we're taking too much zinc, say, it'll cause an imbalance in the copper in our body.
So you're talking about now ratios, right?
I'm talking about ratios. And so, well, we're looking at imbalances. So if it's out of balance, it's out of ratio. Same with a lot of the other electrolytes with calcium and phosphorus and magnesium and all that kind of stuff that needs to have a proper balance.
And the problem is that because the FDA, as good as an organization as it is, and as underfunded as it is, and how it is so manipulated by drug companies and by medical equipment companies and by the vitamin companies, they have very little time is spent on regulation of the nutrition aspect of this country. Very, very little is spent on it. And I'm not putting the government down, it's just that they're so preoccupied with dealing with all these drug companies and these medical equipment manufacturers who've got the big bucks. And so there's constant lobbying pressure for them to get on the side of what they want to sell and get authorized. So what happens is that every mineral in the body, every mineral, every electrolyte, it has to be in balance. So Dr. Jensen mentioned it briefly. So they say for about every 2.5 milligrams of calcium, we're only supposed to have 1 milligram of phosphorus. So that's called the biochemical ratio of calcium and phosphorus. Well, the government doesn't go out and examine every one of those labels that you find at Target or Walmart or some health food store or whatever, or some person that's selling food supplements out of the backseat of their car or wherever it might be, or in the lunchroom at work. The government doesn't do that. But when you submit, and the government also does not require that a food supplement has independent laboratory testing as it does with drug companies. Now we know more and more that the so-called independent laboratory testing by drug companies is not always so kosher or so honest, in that they're not telling the government everything that they found out when they tested these drugs. Well, when it comes to food supplements, there's no requirement for independent laboratory testing. So they can say, oh, we've got 1,000 milligrams of calcium, we've got vitamin D, we've got this, we've got all these B-complex vitamins, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying on the label or the literature, that the sales literature they're giving you, is true. So in other words, many of the food supplements that people are taking have nutraceutical imbalances. Many of them also, therefore, are toxic to the body, just as the last thing you see now is that birth control pills also trigger lupus. Yes, Dr. Jensen.
A great segue into that is you have people who, there's some books out years ago that was kind of the next next fountain of youth was DHEA, and we found people who were supplementing with that, and they ended up having levels that were 10 times the amount of what's in balance with the body, and having deleterious effects from that. Same thing with your birth control pills. Whenever you take birth control pills, it actually stagnates the human growth hormone that's going on in your body, in that it's being processed by your liver, and the insulin-like human growth hormone that's being manufactured in the liver takes a dive because of it. So it's the body's self-regulation that's trying to do its best for you, but you keep feeding it some of these things.
Some of the other things that trigger lupus are infections, bacterial or viral infections. And of course, if my immune system has been compromised by stress or by biochemical stress, where I'm not eating correctly or I'm trying to eat correctly, but unbeknownst to me, I'm eating foods that I'm hypersensitive to, it's going to allow these bacteria and viruses and protozoa to fill up and become gang members in my gastrointestinal system. Another thing, which isn't bad, so we're not putting it down in any way, that triggers lupus is surgery. Another is sunlight. In other words, many people who suffer with lupus have a photosensitivity or hyperphotosensitivity to sunlight. Another factor that triggers or that can trigger lupus is pregnancy, and another is emotional stress. Now, what are some of the symptoms of systemic lupus? Certainly, as Dr. Jensen mentioned here a few moments ago, skin eruptions. Secondly, abdominal pain. Thirdly, anemia. Fourth, anxiety. Fifth, arthritis. Some other additional symptoms include chest pains, depression, fatigue, fever, and fibromyalgia. This goes on, the list goes on. Gastrointestinal inflammation, irritable bowel syndrome, is that a simple enough term? Chronic headaches, hemorrhage, repeated kidney infections or nephritis, there's different varieties of that, mouth or nasal ulcers, neuritis or nerve inflammation. Some other symptoms related to lupus, systemic variety of it, are neuropathy, pain, as we said, photosensitivity, pleuritis, inflammation of the pleura, this is the tissue that surrounds our lungs, epileptic seizures, and chronically swollen lymph glands. So, with that all put down, Dr. Jensen is now going to discuss some diagnostic tests that would be classical, not one, not just two of them, but a group of them, because it's one thing to say, I've got some arthritis in my hand, well, we'll examine this finger. Folks, we need to look at all 5 fingers, or we'll just look at the bone. No, we got to look at the muscles and ligaments and the tendons, and we have to look at the origin of where it comes from. So we're almost always, you have to go back and look at the gastrointestinal system, and that's what Dr. Jensen is going to discuss now.
Thank you, Dr. Lala. Well, we're looking at some of the diagnostic tests, and some of them may go so far as having a skin biopsy, have a CBC and a chem screen. This is looking at the different panels of blood screens that we have, particularly looking at metabolites that find their way into the blood, as well as the constituent chemicals and proteins thereof. RA factor, or rheumatoid arthritis factor, would be another blood test. The IgG and IgG4 food sensitivity, or rather, how about an IgE and IgG4 food sensitivity, where we look at, these are the immunoglobulins, that's what Ig stands for, and they look for different areas within the alimentary tract to see if you're sensitive to that, as well as systemically to see if you're allergic to some of these foods out there.
So the IgG is looking for fixed food sensitivities, right?
IgE and IgG would be looking for fixed. When you're looking at some IgG4, you may be looking at some of the cyclic.
And the cyclic ones are the ones that are often not diagnosed.
Right.
In other words, I may eat a certain food right now and feel fine, and 3 or 4 hours a lupus occurs, or I get a headache, or I get an arthritic reaction.
Well, there are some cases even that you can have, a lot of times with these allergies, they can affect you up to 7 days in the future. Usually we say conservatively 4, but it really can be up to 7 days later. Then you also look at it in some cases, depending upon their menstrual cycle, for some of these women, is that they have, say, at one part of the month, they can have a slice of pizza, and if they're allergic to cheese, they can have a slice of pizza, and it just doesn't seem to affect them at all. But later on, they could have some soup or something else that just has a little bit of milk added to it, and they have a full reaction to that. So sensitivity seems to wax and wane for them throughout the months.
Again, it's only the practitioner who is science-based
Right.
who would even think long enough to sit down with that person and take a history of that issue.
Well, when you look at the test, it looks directly at the immune system and how the immune system is reacting directly with the food substance. So it's not a guesswork of, say, let's see if you have symptoms that occur after eating this food, after not being on it for 2 weeks or something like that. Okay? Where some people will do that. This actually, it looks at it and the machinery can count how many actual reactions it had, so you can tell whether it was an insignificant reaction, a moderate reaction, or a very significant reaction. And so it really classifies it well for you. There's dysbiosis metabolic markers that can also be taken. These dysbiotic metabolic markers are basically what's going on with the bacteria and things in your gut, the flora in your gut, because it's not just bacteria, and how they're reacting with your system and the kind of other chemicals that it's putting out that are toxins to your body that you have to deal with. An amino acid analysis. Maybe you're not digesting your proteins all the way and you're having putrefaction of your proteins in your gut, creating toxins that you have to deal with. All these toxins that build up, they're pushed out through this immune organ that's called the skin. Okay, and so the skin pushes them out, and therefore you get a rash. Hair mineral and toxic metal biopsies, where you can tell if they have the ratios, if they're taking the correct ratios of these electrolytes or minerals in their body, as we were talking about before. There needs to be a balance in it. Or whether they're getting a lot of toxic metals within their diet. In some cases, we found people who were getting uranium through cleaning agents that they were taking. And it just floored me that we were putting uranium within cleaning agents, but it's very common. So you may have uranium in your house right now.
And it doesn't have to be listed if it's below a certain percentage.
Well, it's listed as another kind of a chemical.
Mm-hmm.
You have a chemical name, like urilic acid or something like that. That's not the precise name for it, but it has something like that contains uranium in it.
So it'd have to be a biochemist to even know that it was uranium.
Many times that's it, yes. So those are some of the things that you have to look for. When we're looking at the CBC and lab scan, folks, we're looking at a comprehensive picture of the internal body biochemical activities, okay? And it should be comprehensive and evaluated from a clinical as well as a homeostatic perspective. Clinical perspective is that if it's outside of this range, you are presenting with clinical symptoms, okay? Let's pick on cholesterol. They've all said at 200 it was a problem. But, some people had this idea, you're at 199, oh, you're fine. All of a sudden 200, whoa, let's go on to, let's get them under therapy for this. Whereas a homeostatic range was much below that. It was like 180. But then if you went way low, people thought that if you brought it really low, it was good also. But cholesterol is the basis for all of your hormones, all of your sex hormones. And what we found is when people were really against cholesterol, really working on lowering it, they lowered it so far that it put them into clinical depression. So there has to be a healthy balance within there, and that's what the homeostatic range is for, is taken from a population of healthy people rather than where the clinical was taken from a population of people who are in the hospital. And we know the kind of people that go to the hospital. You go there if you're sick.
And why wait to have to end up at Mayo Clinic, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Or why wait to have to, it'd be far better to go to the Mayo Clinic of natural health care.
Right.
Than to wait to get sick, or to live in denial, or to run around and practice going to practitioners who really are practicing voodoo nutrition.
Yes. Yes.
It's just delays the inevitable and actually can make things worse.
Right. Or have you needlessly suffer with things for a lot longer than you need to suffer for? I remember having a hair mineral analysis on somebody that was having an immune reaction to the point that they just knocked their hand would swell up. And we found out that their iodine was off the charts. And go to find out that we were looking at that, and that iodine actually made the immune complex that much more. So that, yes, they were having the appropriate reaction for somebody who's way out in iodine. And then we find out it's the whole family that had this, and the whole family, being Scandinavian, were used to a diet high in seaweed, which was high in iodine. So it served as an answer that was generational for that particular family.
You know, I think with you talking about that, it might be a good idea to just spend a moment discussing the difference between IgG and IgG4 again.
Okay. When we're looking at IgG, or we could look at IgE even. These are the immunoglobulins that are substantiated in the body, okay? When we look at the immunoglobulins, they have an acronym. It's called GAME. G, A, M, and E. Those are the 4 different types of immunoglobulins in the body. M is the first response of those immunoglobulins. And then as the body starts to narrow in on these things, it starts to redefine, to switch over to different immunoglobulins for that reaction. And so the IgG is usually the first response to it. And then the IgEs is once it's been established, and IgE really looks at in the alimentary tract. And so what we're looking for is food sensitivities that are occurring within the different areas of the body, systemic or in the middle. So we're looking for tests for immediate reactions, as is most commonly utilized by traditional medical practitioners. But we're also looking for those tests that are for delayed sensitivities and very often neglected.
One of the things is that the typical profile on an IgG4 would be at least 200 food tests. But I can take a couple drops of blood out of your fingertip and do an IgG4, and it'll do 10 or say 20. And you think, well, gee, the doctor's done this food allergy test on me. Yeah, the doctor did, but he looked at one finger. He didn't look at the whole hand, and he didn't look at the other hand too. And this, even though I'm ambidextrous, both hands are vital. They both play vital roles.
Let's look at the common diet. Generally, our diet when we were still foraging and all that kind of stuff usually was about 200 foods. It was a wide area of foods. Now, in common society, due to the availability of certain foods, we start to abuse those particular foods so that our diet no longer is as wide as commonly 200 foods used. Now we generally eat about 25 foods. But if you're only testing for 25, that's only a quarter of the foods that you may be going through, or they may be the wrong ones that your diet has changed. So, Dr. Lala, any further thoughts?
Further thoughts is, let's say Mayo Clinic, because we're in Minnesota and we're very, very happy that Mayo Clinic exists. They've always been pro-chiropractic there. And why wait to mess around with, in the natural health care now, why wait to mess around with people who might have some aspect, some understanding of natural health care, or say, well, I'm not going to drive 20 miles to go to somebody who really sounds like they really know what they're doing. I'll go to this local yokel that's close to my neighborhood and not get a full diagnostic workup. Therefore, the likelihood of a misdiagnosis, and a misdiagnosis leads to mistreatment, and mistreatment leads to malpractice. So take good care of your health now. You deserve good health and long life. You do.